He sat alone at the worst table in the city's most exclusive restaurant, wearing a frayed coat and looking lost. The manager wanted him gone. The VIPs mocked him. They thought he was a beggar who had wandered in from the rain. But Kane, a waitress on her last dollar, saw something else. When she ignored orders and spoke to him in his native tongue, she didn't just take his order. She unlocked a secret identity that would bring the entire establishment to its knees. Because the man they were treating like trash wasn't a beggar. He was the man who owned the building. The Obsidian Room wasn't just a restaurant. It was a fortress of wealth located in the heart of Manhattan. The walls were lined with black velvet. The chandeliers were imported crystal from Austria, and a single bottle of water cost more than Kane made in an hour. Kane adjusted her apron, her hands trembling slightly. It was her 3rd month working here, and she still felt like an imposter. She wasn't like the other servers who were aspiring models or actors with perfect smiles and cold eyes. Kane was a student drowning in debt, working double shifts just to keep the lights on in her tiny apartment in Queens. "Kane, table 4 needs water. Now." "Stop daydreaming," Julian, the floor manager, hissed into her ear. Julian was a man who wore suits that were too tight and a cologne that smelled like desperation and pine. He ruled the floor with an iron fist, terrified of one thing, upsetting the clientele. The dinner rush was in full swing. At the center table sat Bradford Sterling, a hedge fund manager who was currently the restaurant's golden goose. He was loud, obnoxious, and drinking a 1992 Screaming Eagle Cabernet like it was soda. Then, the heavy oak doors at the front creaked open. Usually the host, a snooty man named Marcus, would rush to greet guests. But this time, Marcus stayed frozen behind his podium, his nose wrinkling in disgust. Walking in was an old man. He looked weathered. He wore a heavy wool coat that had clearly seen better decades, perhaps in the 80s. It was dampened by the New York drizzle. His hair was white and messy, and he clutched a worn leather satchel to his chest. He didn't look like he belonged in the Obsidian Room. He looked like he belonged on a park bench. The chatter in the restaurant died down. Forks paused halfway to mouths. In a place where image was everything, this man was a stain on a perfect painting. Marcus finally stepped forward, blocking the old man's path. "I'm sorry, sir. We are fully committed tonight. No tables." The old man looked up, his eyes a piercing, watery blue behind wire-rimmed glasses. He spoke in broken, heavily accented English. "Please, just soup? It is cold outside." Marcus sighed, glancing at Julian for backup. Julian marched over, his face tight. He was about to kick the man out when he saw Bradford Sterling watching. Sterling was smirking, clearly amused by the spectacle. "Let him stay," Sterling called out, his voice booming across the room. "Put him in the corner by the kitchen doors. I want to see how the other half lives while I eat my steak. It adds perspective." The room erupted in polite, cruel laughter. Julian, seeing a chance to please his high roller, forced a fake smile. "Right this way, sir." They led the old man past the velvet booths and the fireplace, all the way to a small, wobbly two-top right next to the swinging kitchen doors. Every time a waiter burst out with a tray, a gust of hot, greasy air hit the old man in the face. He sat down, clutching his bag, looking small and defeated. "Kane!" Julian snapped, grabbing her arm. "You take him. Do not offer him the wine list. Do not offer him the specials. Get him a bowl of the potato leek soup and the cheapest water we have, and get him out fast. He's ruining the aesthetic." Kane felt a knot of anger tighten in her chest. She hated the way they looked at him. She looked at the old man, who was currently trying to wipe the rain off his glasses with a rough handkerchief. She grabbed a menu, ignoring Julian's instruction to just bring soup, and walked over. As she passed Bradford Sterling's table, the hedge fund manager leaned back, snapping his fingers at her. "Hey, sweetheart, make sure you sanitize the table after the hobo leaves, all right? Don't want to catch poverty." His trophy girlfriend giggled. "Bradford, stop. He's probably just lost." "He's not lost. He's hungry," Sterling laughed. "Maybe I should toss him a bread roll." Kane bit her tongue so hard she tasted iron. She kept walking. When she reached the small table by the kitchen, the noise of the dining room seemed to fade. Up close, the man didn't smell like the street. He smelled of old paper, rain, and faint tobacco. He looked up at her with eyes that held a profound sadness. "Good evening, sir," Kane said, her voice soft, dropping the pretentious servant accent Julian forced them to use. "My name is Kane. I'll be taking care of you tonight." The man looked at the menu she placed in front of him. His hands shook slightly as he opened it. He stared at the English words, squinting. He seemed confused by the descriptions. Pan-seared scallops with a reduction of saffron. It was too much. He closed the menu and looked at her, embarrassed. I do not understand much," he stammered. "Just warm? Something warm?" From the center of the room, a loud crash echoed. Bradford Sterling had dropped a fork, intentionally. "Check on the bum, will you? Make sure he can pay," Sterling shouted to Julian. Julian marched over to Kane's station. He didn't even look at the old man. "Kane, get his credit card up front. We aren't a charity." The old man shrank into his coat. He understood the tone, if not the words. He reached into his coat pocket with a trembling hand to find his wallet. "No," Kane said firmly, turning her back to Julian. "I will take his order first." "Excuse me?" Julian's eyes bulged. "I said I will take his order," Kane repeated, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew she was risking her job, but looking at this man, she saw her own grandfather, who had passed away 3 years ago in a facility that smelled like bleach. She couldn't let them strip this man of his dignity. Julian leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper. "You are walking a thin line, Vance. Get the money, or you're out on the street with him." Julian stomped away. The old man looked at Kane, his eyes watering. "I go," he whispered. "I go now." "Please stay," Kane said, instinctively reaching out to touch his hand. It was ice cold. And then she saw it. Tucked into the open flap of his leather satchel was a book. It wasn't in English. The title was Les Misérables, and it was an ancient, leather-bound French edition. Kane's mind flashed back to her childhood. Her mother had been a translator. The house was always filled with languages. French had been their secret code, a language of comfort before her mother got sick and the debts piled up. Kane looked at the old man, then at the chaotic, loud, English-speaking room that was mocking him. She took a deep breath. She decided to change the world for him, just for a moment. Kane leaned in close, blocking out the view of Bradford Sterling and the staring diners. She lowered her voice and switched languages. "Monsieur, ne partez pas. Vous êtes en sécurité ici avec moi. Sir, do not leave. You are safe here with me." The reaction was instantaneous. The old man's head snapped up. The confusion vanished from his eyes, replaced by a shock so pure it was heartbreaking. He stared at her as if she were an angel who had just descended from the ceiling. Vous parlez français? You speak French?" His voice rasped, suddenly stronger, deeper. "Oui," Kane smiled, and for the first time that night, it was a real smile. "Je l'ai appris de ma mère. Le menu est compliqué, mais je peux vous aider. Qu'est-ce qui vous ferait plaisir?" "Yes, I learned from my mother. The menu is complicated, but I can help. What would make you happy?" The man's shoulders dropped 3 inches. The tension left his jaw. He wasn't a confused vagrant anymore. He was a human being, connecting with another. Ah, he sighed, a long, rattling exhale. Je suis fatigué, mademoiselle. Je veux juste de la soupe à l'oignon. Et peut-être un verre de vin. Mais pas cette eau colorée qu'ils servent habituellement. I'm tired, miss. I just want onion soup, and perhaps a glass of wine, but not that colored water they usually serve. Kane chuckled. Nous avons une soupe à l'oignon, gratinée au gruyère, et pour le vin. She glanced at the wine list. She knew Julian would kill her if she opened a rare bottle for a man who looked like he couldn't afford a bus ticket. But Kane didn't care anymore. She had already decided this might be her last night. Aimez-vous le Bordeaux? She asked. J'adore le Bordeaux, he said, his eyes twinkling. J'ai grandi près de Saint-Emilion. Kane nodded. She turned and walked to the bar. The bartender, a guy named Rick, who was usually cool, looked at her skeptically. Julian said tap water, Rick warned. Give me the 2015 Chateau Margaux, Kane said calmly. Rick dropped the rag he was holding. Are you insane? That's 800 tolls a glass. Sterling is drinking the Screaming Eagle, but even he didn't order the Margaux. I'll pay for it, Kane lied. She had $40 in her bank account. Just pour it, and put it in the crystal balloon glass, not the standard house glass. Rick shook his head. It's your funeral, Kane. She carried the glass of dark, ruby liquid back to the table, along with a basket of warm, crusty bread she had snatched from the warmer. When she placed the wine in front of the old man, he didn't grab it greedily. He lifted the glass by the stem, swirled it expertly, and inhaled deeply. He closed his eyes. Magnifique, he whispered. He took a sip and looked at Kane with a profound intensity. Merci. Je m'appelle Antoine. Je suis Kane, she replied. Kane, Antoine tested the name. Why is a girl who speaks the language of poets working in a place of sharks? He gestured vaguely at Sterling's table, where the hedge fund manager was now loudly berating a busboy for spilling a drop of water. Dettes? Kane said simply in French. Debts. Life is expensive, Antoine. Antoine nodded slowly. He broke a piece of bread. Yes, life is expensive. But dignity is priceless, and you have given me mine tonight. For 20 minutes, they were in their own bubble. Antoine ate his soup with impeccable manners, far better manners than Sterling, who was chewing with his mouth open. Kane learned that Antoine was visiting New York for business, but he found the city cold and the people colder. He told her about his wife, who had passed away years ago, and how she used to make soup just like this. It was the most human interaction Kane had experienced in months, but the bubble was about to burst. Bradford Sterling had noticed the wine glass. He noticed the crystal, and he noticed the label on the bottle Kane had left on the side station. Sterling stood up, his face flushed with alcohol and rage. He marched across the room, his heavy footsteps silencing the restaurant once again. He slammed his hand down on Antoine's small, wobbly table, causing the soup to splash. Is that... Sterling pointed a shaking finger at the glass. Is that the 15 Margaux? Kane stepped in between Sterling and Antoine. Can I help you, Mr. Sterling? You gave the good stuff to the hobo, Sterling shouted, spit flying. I asked for the best wine in the house, and Julian told me you were out of the Margaux. And now I see the bum drinking it? Julian materialized instantly, his face pale. Mr. Sterling, there must be a mistake. The mistake is letting this trash in here. Sterling grabbed Antoine's coat sleeve. Look at him. He probably stole that jacket. He's spending my money, Julian. I invest in this restaurant group. Technically, I'm paying for that wine. Antoine remained seated. He didn't speak. He just watched Sterling with a calm, almost bored expression. He carefully wiped a drop of soup from his lip. "Get him out," Sterling commanded. "Now, or I pull my funding, and I make sure every friend I have on Wall Street blacklists this dump." Julian turned to Kane. His eyes were dead. "Kane, take the wine away. Security will escort him out." "No," Kane said. The word rang out clearly in the silent room. "Excuse me?" Julian stepped closer. "He hasn't finished his meal. He is a paying customer. I won't let you throw him out into the rain just because he—" Kane gestured to Sterling, "is having a tantrum." The room gasped. A waitress standing up to a billionaire. It was suicide. "You're fired," Julian barked. "Get your things and get out. Security." Two large men in black suits appeared from the shadows near the entrance. They moved toward the table. Kane felt tears prick her eyes, but she didn't move. She stood in front of Antoine like a shield. Then the old man stood up. He didn't stand up like a tired old man anymore. He stood up slowly, unfolding to his full height. He smoothed down his frayed coat. He adjusted his glasses. And then he reached into that battered leather satchel. He didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a phone, an old, cracked smartphone. He dialed a number, put it to his ear, and spoke in perfect, crisp English, with an accent that sounded less like a peasant and more like pure aristocracy. "Jean-Luc?" "Yes." "It's Antoine. I'm at the Obsidian Room on 5th Avenue. Yes, the one in the Sterling building." Bradford Sterling froze. The color drained from his face. Antoine looked directly at Sterling, his blue eyes turning to ice. "Buy it," Antoine said into the phone. There was a pause. "No, Jean-Luc. Not the restaurant," Antoine said, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent room. "Buy the building, and terminate the lease of the tenant on the ground floor immediately. Yes, tonight." The silence in the Obsidian Room was heavier than the crystal chandeliers hanging above them. Bradford Sterling's mouth was slightly ajar. He looked at the old man, Antoine, trying to process the words that had just been spoken. Buy the building? It was absurd. This man was wearing a coat with frayed cuffs. "You're bluffing," Sterling spat, though his voice lacked its usual thunder. "Who do you think you are? This is a pathetic joke. Julian, throw them both out. Now." Julian, sweating profusely, motioned to the security guards. "Grab him. The police can sort out this disturbance." The two large guards stepped forward, one reaching for Antoine's shoulder. "Do not touch him," Kane said, stepping in front again. Her voice was shaking, but her resolve was iron. She didn't know if the old man was crazy or telling the truth, but she knew he didn't deserve to be manhandled. Antoine gently placed a hand on Kane's shoulder and moved her aside. He looked at the guard with an expression of calm authority that made the large man hesitate. Then Julian's cell phone began to ring loudly in the silent room. It was his personal line. He looked at the screen, frowned, and sent it to voicemail. It rang again immediately. "Answer it, Julian," Antoine said softly. It wasn't a suggestion. Julian, unnerved by the command in the old man's voice, answered the phone. "This is Julian. Look, I'm in the middle of a situation." Julian stopped talking. His eyes went wide, staring at the far wall as the color drained entirely from his face, leaving him a sickly shade of grey. He began to tremble visibly. Yes, Mr. Henderson. I understand. Yes, sir. Right away, sir." Julian lowered the phone slowly. He looked at Bradford Sterling, then at the security guards, and finally, with an expression of abject terror, at the old man in the shabby coat. "Julian, who was that?" Sterling demanded, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Was it the owners? Did you tell them about this bum?" Julian ignored Sterling. He took a shaky step toward Antoine and bowed, a deep, genuine bow of subservience, unlike the fake ones he gave the usual rich customers. Mr. Dubois," Julian stammered, his voice cracking. "I had no idea. There has been a terrible misunderstanding." A gasp rippled through the dining room. The name Dubois was whispered from table to table like a contagion. Bradford Sterling froze. "Dubois? Which Dubois? Not Antoine Dubois?" Antoine Dubois. The name was legendary, not just in France, but on Wall Street. He was the silent titan behind LVMH competitors, a real estate mogul who owned half of Paris and significant chunks of Manhattan, a man known for his ruthless business acumen and his near-total reclusiveness since the death of his wife. He was worth 10 times what Bradford Sterling hoped to be worth in his lifetime. Antoine didn't even look at Julian. He finished the last sip of his Chateau Margaux, placed the glass gently on the table, and turned to the security guards who were still hovering uncertainly. "Gentlemen," Antoine said, his voice crisp and commanding, "you are employed by the building management, correct? Not the restaurant itself?" "Yes, sir," the lead guard said, instinctively recognizing the alpha in the room. "Excellent," Antoine said. "As of 3 minutes ago, my holding company acquired the controlling stake in this property from Mr. Henderson. I am your new employer." The guards snapped to attention. Antoine pointed a long, slender finger at Bradford Sterling. "Remove that man from my premises. He is trespassing and creating a public disturbance." The shift in power was visceral. It sucked the air out of the room. Bradford Sterling's face turned a violent shade of purple. "You can't do that. Do you know who I am? I have money in this place. You can't just buy a skyscraper in 3 minutes over the phone." Antoine adjusted his glasses calmly. "Mr. Sterling, you deal in hedge funds. You gamble with other people's money and call it power. I deal in assets. When I want something, I buy it. Jean-Luc has had the paperwork ready for this building for 6 months. We were just waiting for the right price. Tonight, the price became irrelevant." Sterling looked around the room for support, but the other diners, CEOs, socialites, politicians, were all staring at their plates, desperate to avoid eye contact with Antoine Dubois. They knew a bigger shark when they saw one. They were already mentally distancing themselves from Sterling. "Julian, do something!" Sterling screamed, desperation creeping in. "Tell him I'm your best customer." Julian was shaking so hard his teeth chattered. He looked at Antoine, pleading with his eyes. "Mr. Dubois, sir. Mr. Sterling is a valued investor." "Was," Antoine corrected. He pulled out his cracked phone again and dialed a number. He put it on speaker. "Oui, Antoine?" Jean-Luc's voice filled the room. "Jean-Luc, the lease for the ground floor restaurant space. What are the termination clauses?" "Standard immediate termination clause in the event of a change in building ownership, Antoine. We can evict within 24 hours. "Execute it," Antoine said. "Tonight. Consider it done." Antoine hung up and looked at Julian. "You are closed, permanently. I suggest you begin inventory." Julian looked like he was going to faint. He grabbed the edge of a table to steady himself. His career in high-end dining was over in seconds. Sterling, realizing his financial stake in the restaurant had just evaporated, lunged toward Antoine. "You old bat, you just cost me $2 million. The 2 security guards moved with lightning speed. Before Sterling got within 5 feet of Antoine, they had him restrained, his arms twisted behind his back. "Get your hands off me!" Sterling bellowed, thrashing. His trophy girlfriend was already grabbing her purse and edging toward the door, abandoning the sinking ship. "Take him out the back exit, by the dumpsters." Antoine instructed the guards calmly. He seems fond of talking about trash. He should get acquainted with it. Sterling continued to scream threats and obscenities as he was dragged through the kitchen doors, the very doors he had banished Antoine to earlier. The kitchen staff stared, wide-eyed, as the mighty hedge fund manager was hauled out like a bag of refuse. The dining room was dead silent. No one moved, no one ate. They were all terrified of drawing the attention of the man in the frayed coat. Antoine stood alone in the center of the room for a moment, the undisputed king of the castle. Then he turned slowly and looked at the only person who hadn't treated him like dirt. He looked at Kane. When the heavy kitchen door swung shut behind the flailing, screaming figure of Bradford Sterling, a deafening silence descended upon the obsidian room. It was a vacuum, sudden and absolute. The ambient music, some generic down-tempo jazz loop, seemed obscenely loud in the stillness. 50 guests, representing the upper crust of Manhattan's social and financial elite, sat frozen. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. Wine glasses remained suspended in mid-air. They were witnessing the impossible. The alpha predator of their ecosystem had just been dragged out like a bag of wet trash by a man wearing a coat that looked like it had been salvaged from a dumpster. Antoine Dubois stood in the center of the room. He didn't look triumphant. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, smoothed the frayed lapel of his coat, and then turned his gaze toward Julian. Julian was no longer the terrifying floor manager who ruled the staff with an iron fist. He was a puddle of sweat in a cheap suit. He was clinging to the host stand as if it were the mast of a sinking ship. His face was a pallid shade of grey, his eyes darting between Antoine and the terrified kitchen staff, peering through the porthole windows of the swinging doors. "Mr. Dubois," Julian croaked. His voice cracked, high and pathetic. He cleared his throat and tried to summon a shred of his usual oily charm, but it came out sounding like a desperate plea. "Mr. Dubois, sir, you have to understand. We have protocols, strictly enforced protocols regarding the dress code. I was simply—" Antoine didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. He simply held up one hand, palm out. "Stop," Antoine said. The word was soft, but it hit Julian like a physical slap. Antoine took a slow step forward. "Protocols. Is it protocol to mock a hungry man? Is it protocol to let a customer humiliate another human being for sport? Or is that just a personal hobby of yours, Julian?" Julian's stamina collapsed. Mr. Sterling is a very powerful man. He invests in the group. I was just trying to protect the business." "And that is your failure," Antoine said, his French accent thickening, wrapping around the words like barbed wire. "You think the business is the velvet on the walls and the price of the wine? You think the business is protecting the ego of men like Sterling?" Antoine looked around the room, making eye contact with several diners who quickly looked down at their plates. "The business of a restaurant," Antoine said, his voice carrying to the back corners, "is hospitality. It comes from the Latin word hospes, meaning guest or stranger. It means shelter. It means warmth. You turned this place into a cold storage for egos." He turned back to Julian. "Give me your keys." "Sir?" Julian blinked, tears welling in his eyes. "The keys to the restaurant, the alarm codes, the safe combination. Place them on the table." Julian's hands shook violently as he unclipped a heavy ring of keys from his belt. The jingle of the metal sounded like a death knell in the quiet room. He placed them on the table next to Antoine's empty soup bowl. Am I fired?" Julian whispered. "Fired implies you had a job," Antoine said coldly. "You were an infection. Today the building is cured. Leave. Now, before I have security escort you out the same way they did Mr. Sterling." Julian didn't argue. He didn't look at Kane. He stripped off his name tag, dropped it on the floor, and scurried toward the front door, head bowed, vanishing into the rainy night. The emptying of the room. Antoine exhaled a long breath, his shoulders slumping slightly. The titan of industry vanished for a second, replaced by the weary old man. He turned to the head of security, who was standing at attention. "Lock the doors behind him. No one else enters tonight." Then Antoine addressed the dining room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I apologize for the disruption to your digestion. As the new owner of this establishment, I am declaring the kitchen closed for the evening." A murmur of protest rippled through the room. "However," Antoine continued, "your meals are on the house. You may finish your wine, but I ask that you depart within 30 minutes. I require the room." The murmur turned into a buzz of relief and excitement. A free meal at the Obsidian Room. That was a story they could tell at their country clubs tomorrow. Slowly the tension broke. People began to eat hurriedly, casting furtive glances at the eccentric billionaire, desperate to memorize his face. Antoine ignored them. He turned his back on the wealth and the glamour. He walked slowly toward the service station where Kane was standing. She hadn't moved. She was clutching her ordering pad to her chest like a shield. Her heart was beating so hard she felt dizzy. The adrenaline of the confrontation had crashed, leaving her trembling. She watched him approach. He didn't look like a billionaire to her. He still looked like the sad man who missed his wife's soup. "Kane," he said softly. "Monsieur Dubois," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "Please," he winced. "If you call me Monsieur Dubois, I will feel like I am in a board meeting. I am Antoine, just Antoine." He gestured to the small, wobbly table near the kitchen doors, the punishment table, where Sterling had banished him. "Will you sit with me? The wine is still good, even if the company has been dramatic." Kane hesitated. I'm supposed to be clearing tables. Julian, I mean, there is no manager, but—" "Sit," Antoine said gently. "You are not a waitress tonight, Kane. You are my guest." She sat. The chair was hard wood, unlike the velvet banquettes, but Antoine settled into his seat as if it were a throne. He poured the last of the Chateau Margaux into her glass, then a splash into his own. He studied her face for a long moment. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was heavy with unasked questions. "Why did you do it?" Antoine asked finally. Kane blinked. "Do what?" "Why did you stand in front of me?" Antoine leaned forward. "You are young. You are obviously, how do you say, financially fragile. You needed this job. You saw a powerful, angry man demanding you throw out a beggar. Logic dictates you should have thrown me out. Self-preservation dictates you should have agreed with Julian." He took a sip of wine, watching her over the rim of the crystal glass. "So why, Kane Vance, did you commit career suicide for a bowl of soup and an old man you did not know?" Kane looked down at the dark red wine. She thought about her bank account, which currently had 42,088 in it. She thought about the rent due in 3 days. She thought about the hunger that gnawed at her own stomach sometimes when she skipped meals to save money. "Because you were invisible," she said quietly. Antoine lowered his glass. "Invisible?" "I know what it looks like," Kane said, her voice gaining strength. "To stand in a room full of people and have them look right through you because you don't matter to them. I feel like that every shift. But when you walked in, you looked like my grandfather." She looked up, meeting his piercing blue eyes. "He died in a nursing home 3 years ago. He had dementia. Toward the end, people stopped talking to him. They talked about him, or around him, like he was furniture. It broke my heart. When I saw you sitting there, clutching that book, you didn't look like a bum to me. You looked like a human being who was cold, and I just couldn't let them erase you. Antoine stared at her. His eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, softened with a glistening layer of emotion. Your grandfather, Antoine said softly. He was a lucky man to be loved by you. He reached into his battered leather satchel. Cain flinched slightly, half expecting another phone call that would buy another skyscraper. But he pulled out the book. Les Misérables. He ran his hand over the worn leather cover. My wife, Geneviève, gave me this book 40 years ago, he said. She told me that the world is divided into two kinds of people, those who look at the law and those who look at the soul. Javert and Valjean. He tapped the book. I have spent the last 5 years, since she passed away, traveling the world. I have houses I do not visit. I have cars I do not drive. I have an empire that runs itself, but I am looking for something I cannot buy. What is that? Cain asked. Integrity, Antoine said. It is a rare commodity. I test people, Cain. I dress like this. I go to my own hotels, my own restaurants. I see how they treat the nobody. Usually they fail. They treat Antoine the billionaire like a god, and Antoine the old man like a nuisance. He gestured to the empty space where Sterling had sat. That man, he is poor. He has millions, but he is poor. His soul is a desert. But you... Antoine smiled, and the wrinkles around his eyes deepened. You spoke my language, not just French. You spoke the language of the heart. You gave me the good wine. You defended me when it cost you everything. The proposal. The last of the diners were filing out now, casting curious looks at the pair in the corner. The restaurant was nearly empty, save for the kitchen staff peering anxiously through the windows. Antoine looked around the room. He looked at the black velvet walls, the pretentiously dim lighting, the heavy, uncomfortable chairs. He looked at it with pure disgust. I hate this place, he stated flatly. It smells of greed. It's very popular, Cain offered weakly. It is popular because it is exclusive. It makes people feel important because they are in and others are out. That is a cheap trick. He turned back to Cain. I bought the building tonight, Cain. Do you know what that means? It means you're the landlord. It means I own the lease, and I am cancelling it. Cain's eyes widened. You're closing the restaurant. But the staff, the kitchen guys, they have families. I am closing this restaurant, Antoine corrected. I am burning the obsidian room to the ground, metaphorically speaking. I want to build something else. Something real. A place that smells of butter and thyme, not cologne and cash. A place where the soup is the star, not the client's ego. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a plain white business card. He placed it on the table and slid it across to her. I need a partner. Cain laughed nervously. It was a breathless, hysterical sound. Antoine, I appreciate the wine, really. But I'm a waitress. I have no degree. I have student loans. I can't be a partner in a multi-million-dollar venture. I have enough MBAs, Antoine said dismissively. I have armies of accountants. Jean-Luc, my assistant, can calculate the profit margin of a crouton in 3 seconds. I don't need a calculator, Cain. I need a compass. He leaned forward, his intensity pinning her to the chair. I need someone who understands that if a man walks in from the rain, you give him soup. I need someone who will fight for the dignity of the guest. I can teach you how to read a balance sheet. I cannot teach you how to give a damn. He tapped the card. I am offering you the position of general manager and managing partner. You will have a salary that will wipe out your debts in 3 months. You will have a percentage of the profits. But more importantly, you will have control. You will design the culture. You will hire the staff, or rehire the good ones from tonight. Kane stared at the card. It felt like it was vibrating. It was a lifeline. It was a lottery ticket. But it was terrifying. "Why?" she whispered. "Why trust me with this? You met me an hour ago. Because in that hour, you showed more character than the board of directors of my last 3 acquisitions combined," Antoine said. He stood up, buttoning his frayed coat. The transformation was complete. He was no longer the beggar or the tycoon. He was just a man offering a hand. "The Obsidian Room is dead, Kane. The question is, are you brave enough to help me build what comes next?" Kane looked at the empty restaurant. She imagined the black velvet torn down. She imagined sunlight. She imagined the smell of her mother's kitchen. She looked at the kitchen door, where the terrified staff were waiting for their fate. She could save them. She could change everything. She stood up. Her legs were shaky, but her chin was high. "Oui," Kane said, her voice steady. "Oui, Antoine. On le fait. Yes, Antoine, let's do it." Antoine smiled, a genuine, brilliant smile that took 20 years off his face. He extended his hand. "Then let us begin," he said. "First order of business. We need a sledgehammer for these terrible walls." They shook hands over the table where he had eaten his soup. It wasn't just a business deal. It was a pact. And as their hands clasped, the rain outside seemed to soften, washing away the pretension of the Obsidian Room, making way for something new to grow. The morning after the incident, the Obsidian Room didn't open. The heavy oak doors remained locked, and a simple handwritten sign was taped to the glass. "Under new management. Closed for soul searching." Inside, however, the atmosphere was electric with chaos. Kane stood in the center of the dining room, still wearing her street clothes, jeans and a thick sweater. It felt surreal. 24 hours ago, she had been invisible here, terrified of dropping a fork. Now she held a master key set that felt heavy in her palm. Antoine Dubois was there too. He wasn't wearing the frayed coat today. He was dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that whispered of old money and European elegance, though his eyes still held that mischievous, grandfatherly warmth. Alongside him was Jean-Luc, his chief of staff, a man with a tablet who looked like he could calculate the trajectory of a rocket while ordering lunch. "The black velvet goes," Antoine declared, waving a hand at the walls. "It suffocates the light. Tear it down." "And the staff?" Jean-Luc asked, his pen poised. "Julian is gone, obviously," Antoine said, his voice hardening slightly. "As for the rest, that is up to Kane." Kane froze. The entire kitchen staff and the remaining floor team were lined up by the bar, looking at her with a mixture of fear, skepticism, and in some cases, open disdain. They knew her as the girl who scraped plates. Now she was the executioner. She stepped forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at Marcus, the host who had sneered at Antoine the night before. She looked at the sous chef who used to yell at her for not running food fast enough. "I don't want to fire anyone who wants to be here for the right reasons," Kane said, her voice trembling slightly before finding its footing. "But the culture changes today. If you think a customer's value is determined by their watch, you should leave. If you think screaming in the kitchen makes the food taste better, you should leave." She took a deep breath. "But if you want to cook and serve food that actually makes people happy, stay. We are going to work harder than we ever have, but we are going to do it with respect." 3 servers left immediately, walking out with their noses in the air. Marcus, the host, hesitated. He looked at Cain, then at the terrifying figure of Antoine Dubois. He took off his earpiece, placed it on the counter, and walked out. But the rest stayed. They looked at Cain not as a tyrant, but with a sudden, dawning curiosity. "Good," Antoine said, nodding at Cain. "Now let us discuss the menu. I'm craving something real." The education of Cain Vance. The next 4 months were a baptism by fire. Cain learned that running a restaurant was 10% tasting food and 90% putting out fires. There were supplier issues, plumbing disasters, and a permit war with the city that Antoine settled with a single, terrifying phone call to the mayor. But the hardest battle was internal. Imposter syndrome gnawed at her. Who was she? She was a college dropout with debt, pretending to be a restaurateur. One late night in the 3rd month, Cain was sitting on the floor of the half-renovated dining room, surrounded by samples of tablecloths. She was crying. Antoine found her there. He brought 2 mugs of hot chocolate, made with real Belgian shavings, not powder. "It is too much," Cain confessed, wiping her eyes. "I chose the wrong shade of cream for the walls. The chef hates the new supplier. I don't know how to read these P&L statements Jean-Luc sends me. You made a mistake, Antoine. You should have hired a professional." Antoine sat down on the floor next to her, disregarding his expensive suit trousers. "Ma chère," he said softly, "if I wanted a professional, I would have hired a Harvard MBA who would have turned this place into a sterile machine that prints money and serves soulless food. I hired you because you have empathy." "Empathy doesn't balance the books," Cain argued. "No, but it builds loyalty, and loyalty builds a brand that lasts." Antoine took a sip of his chocolate. "Let me tell you a secret about business, Cain. It is not about being the smartest person in the room. It is about being the one who cares the most. You care. That is why the chef is arguing with you, because he respects that you have a vision, and he wants to test it. If he didn't respect you, he would just nod and serve garbage." He pointed to the paint samples, and regarding the walls, pick the one that feels like morning sunlight. The rest is just details. That conversation shifted something in her. Cain stopped trying to be a manager and started being herself. She spent hours in the kitchen with Chef Henri, a temperamental genius, debating the exact ratio of Gruyère to Emmental in the onion soup. She didn't command him. She tasted with him. She learned the language of the kitchen. She renamed the restaurant. The Obsidian Room was dead. Chez Cain and Antoine was born. The grand opening was 6 months after the night of the Margot. The doors opened again. The transformation was shocking. The oppressive darkness was gone. The space was now airy, filled with warm woods, soft cream walls, and vibrant impressionist paintings from Antoine's private collection, originals that were worth more than the building itself. But they weren't behind velvet ropes. They were just there, part of the room. The menu was small, 1 page, classic French country food, beef bourguignon that fell apart at the touch of a fork, coq au vin that tasted like a grandmother's love, and of course, soupe à l'oignon gratiné. The critics came, sharpening their knives. The New York Times food critic, a woman known for destroying careers with a single adjective, sat at table 7. Cain served her personally, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. "No foam?" the critic asked, looking at the bowl of soup. "No deconstructed croutons?" "Just soup," Cain smiled, hot, honest, and made with patience. The review came out 2 days later. The headline read, "In a city of pretense, a waitress and a billionaire serve the rarest ingredient of all, heart." It was a sensation. The restaurant was booked solid for 3 months. But unlike the old days, the VIP list wasn't just hedge fund managers. It was teachers saving up for an anniversary. It was nurses coming off a night shift. It was the neighbours. Antoine kept his promise. He was a silent partner in operations, but a loud presence in spirit. He sat at his corner table, table 4, twice a week. He read his books, drank his wine, and watched Cain command the room with a grace that made his chest swell with pride. She was no longer the frightened girl in the apron. She was the matriarch of the house. She moved with purpose. She greeted billionaires and bus drivers with the exact same warmth. She had paid off her debts, moved into a nice apartment near the park, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the mailman bringing bills. The return of the ghost. It was a Tuesday in November, a night remarkably similar to the one where they had first met. The rain was lashing against the windows, turning the city into a blur of grey and neon. The dinner rush was tapering off. The restaurant was warm, smelling of thyme, butter, and red wine. The low hum of conversation was happy, punctuated by the clinking of glasses. Cain was at the host stand, reviewing the reservation list for the next day, when the heavy front door opened. A gust of cold wind blew in, along with a figure that hesitated in the entryway. At first, Cain didn't recognize him. He had lost weight, a lot of it. The expensive tailored Italian suit was gone, replaced by a generic raincoat that looked a size too big. His hair, usually gelled into an aggressive helmet of arrogance, was thinning and wet. But she knew the eyes. They were the eyes of a man who had lost his kingdom. It was Bradford Sterling. The news had been brutal to him. After the Obsidian incident, Antoine Dubois hadn't just bought the building. He had quietly pulled his assets from any fund Sterling was associated with. When the Wolf of Wall Street, Dubois, backs away, the pack follows. Sterling's investors panicked. His liquidity dried up. His partners ousted him. He had become a pariah, not because he was poor, but because he was revealed to be a fool who picked a fight with a god. Sterling stood there, dripping on the mat. He looked into the warm, golden glow of the dining room. He saw people eating, laughing, sharing bread. He looked like a ghost haunting the living. Sarah, the young hostess, smiled at him. "Good evening, sir. Checking in." Sterling flinched. He wasn't used to kindness anymore. No, I don't have a reservation. We are quite full," Sarah said apologetically. "I know," Sterling's voice was raspy. I walked by. I saw the lights." He turned to leave, his hand grasping the brass handle of the door. Cain felt a sudden surge of memory. The mockery, the snapped fingers. Don't want to catch poverty. The urge to let him walk back out into the cold rain was strong. It would be poetic justice. It would be what he deserved. But then she looked at table 4. Antoine was there. He had lowered his book, The Count of Monte Cristo, fittingly. He was watching Cain over the rim of his glasses. He didn't signal her. He didn't nod. He just watched, waiting to see what the woman he had mentored would do. Integrity, Antoine had told her, is doing the right thing when you have the power to do the wrong thing. Cain stepped out from behind the host stand. "Mr. Sterling," she said. Her voice was clear, carrying across the entrance. Bradford Sterling froze. He turned slowly. When he saw Cain, shame washed over his face so visibly it was painful to watch. He looked at her. The waitress he had tried to get fired, the woman who now owned the room he was standing in. "Miss Vance?" he mumbled, looking at the floor. I didn't know you were working tonight. I'll leave." "You look cold," Cain said. She didn't smile, but her voice wasn't hard. It was neutral. "Have you eaten?" Sterling looked up, surprised. Not really. No." "We have soup," Cain said. The onion soup. It's very good for the cold." "I can't get a table," Sterling said, gesturing to the packed room. "And I probably shouldn't be here." Kane picked up a menu. She walked over to him. Up close, he smelled of rain and cheap coffee. The smell of desperation. "The dining room is full," Kane said, "but we always keep one seat open." She walked past the VIP booths, past the window seats, past the bar. She walked all the way to the back, near the swinging kitchen doors. To table 4. Antoine Dubois sat there. There was an empty chair opposite him. Sterling stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at Antoine, terrified. I can't sit there." Antoine gestured to the empty chair. "Sit, Mr. Sterling. The draft from the kitchen is not so bad tonight." Sterling looked at Kane, then at Antoine. He slowly lowered himself into the chair. He looked small. Kane didn't call a server. She went to the kitchen herself. She ladled a bowl of the rich, dark broth, topped with the toasted baguette and the bubbling, golden Gruyère. She placed it on a tray with a glass of the house red, not the Margaux, but a decent Côte du Rhône. She brought it to the table and placed it in front of Sterling. "On the house," Kane said. Sterling looked at the soup. Steam curled up, hitting his face. His hand shook as he picked up the spoon. He took a bite. He closed his eyes. A single tear leaked out, tracking through the rain on his cheek. It wasn't just soup. It was mercy. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. Antoine didn't mock him. He didn't lecture him. He simply broke a piece of his own bread and pushed the butter dish toward Sterling. "Eat," Antoine said. "It is cold outside. In here, we eat." Kane stepped back to the service station. She watched the two men. One, a titan who played at being poor to find humanity. The other, a broken man who had played at being a god and found humility. They sat together at the wobbly table by the kitchen door, bound by a bowl of soup and the strange, twisting road of fate. Kane felt a hand on her arm. It was Chef Henri. "You are crazy, Patrona," Henri muttered, looking at Sterling. "After what he did to you?" Kane smiled, wiping a smudge from the counter. "He was hungry, Henri. That's all that matters today." She looked back at Antoine. He caught her eye and raised his glass in a silent toast. It wasn't a toast to success, or money, or revenge. It was a toast to the one thing money couldn't buy, the one thing Sterling had lost and Kane had found. It was a toast to grace. Kane took a deep breath of the warm, savory air. She adjusted her blazer, picked up a water pitcher, and walked back into the dining room to pour for table 6. She was Kane Vance. She was a waitress. She was an owner. And she was finally, truly, home. What a powerful ending. Kane didn't just win by becoming successful. She won by refusing to let Bradford Sterling's cruelty change who she was. By serving him that soup, she proved that she was the bigger person in every way that matters. It's a reminder that while karma can be harsh, grace is a choice we make. I want to know what you would have done. Would you have served Sterling, or would you have kicked him out into the rain? Be honest in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please smash that like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness always wins. And don't forget to subscribe for more twisting tales of drama and redemption. Thanks for watching.